And so you've got three different risk buckets, right? You've got your personal risk bucket, you've got your market risk bucket, and your aspirational risk bucket. Now, the first one, that keeps you out of poverty, right? If you lose your job tomorrow, you've got some money sitting there that you're not going to, be behind on your rent and get booted out of your house and then, be looking for someone else. And, there needs to be some amount of money there for that purpose. Then you've got your market risk bucket, right? And that is about lifestyle maintenance. Most of people's money should be in the market risk bucket, right? That's where property would sit. That's where your equities, if you own it, would sit, amongst other things. And then you've got your aspirational risk bucket. And then for those people that are interested, you've got your cryptocurrency and your that's for something which is, which for lack of a better term, your YOLO trade, right? Like it's something you have a large chance of capital losses, but there's also the chance that it could change your life and you can, have an allocation to that bucket.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to Dashdot Insider, the auditory epicenter for passionate property investors seeking a life of freedom, choice, and abundance. Today, I'm joined by another one of our very special clients that we have here at Dashdot. We're talking to Marcos Volich. And how are you doing, Marcos?
Well, thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well, thanks. A little bit about your portfolio. You've got a couple of investment properties that you've worked with us here at Dashdot to acquire, and looking at the growth from some vals that have just come in last month, and the total growth looks like it's around about $297,000 in equity, and that's over properties that you've had for less than 2 years in total. So pretty good overall.
Very happy with the outcome. I, like a lot of people, was looking to embark on to build a property portfolio, but wasn't quite sure how to do it. And I explored a number of options with different buyers agents, and Dashdot was the one that I settled on. Now we could go into the reasons why later on, but on the basis that we're talking about the portfolio, I might as well just kind of give my reasons now. In reality, I come from an investing industry, and people are looking for value for money when they approach a person who's supposedly selling their insights, something that the average person can't do, And so when you're looking around at a buyer's agent who's effectively doing the same thing, you want to make sure that they're doing something that you probably can't do yourself. And herein lies the issue with a lot of the other buyer's agents that I found that I dealt with, in that they often will try to push you into something which is a sure thing. What are the characteristics of that sure thing? It'll be capital cities, inner city suburbs, land, family homes, something that most people think that they don't need to go to a third party to acquire, right? They can do that themselves. They know their city relatively well, and they can buy a property which will do okay. Dashdot was offering something a little bit different. They were offering these insights to say, we're going to buy properties which are poised for growth, and we're going to be using data-driven decision-making to arrive at that particular property. And that is where I found something that was quite special, and I'll admit that through the discovery process, I was a little bit reluctant about some of the properties which were originally put forward. Now, some of those ones have done great, and I'm sure all of them have, and the ones that we settled on have done great as well. Now, would I have been able to, or even been interested in buying the properties that we ultimately went with? Perhaps not, because I didn't see the value wasn't apparent in those properties when I bought them, but it is now. And so it's fantastic to see the investment process pan out to the benefit of your clients, and that's what's happened with me.
Okay. All right. What's also very interesting about your perspective and your way of thinking about investment, I think, comes from your background. Now, I want to make sure that I get the wording of this 100% right. You are a CFA charter holder and Chief Operating Officer of a European-based fixed income investment management firm. So in that sort of long, wordy title, the guts of it means that you have access to a very broad range of investing options. So can you walk me through your investment journey and how you started What got you into Aussie property?
The way I came into this role was I actually lived in London for about 8 years, from 2012 until the end of 2020. And I lived and I worked for essentially for the same company the entire time. And then with COVID, everybody was suddenly working from home. And I took this opportunity to engage with the company to see if it was possible that I could return home with my role. And that was ultimately successful. And so from 2020 until today, I'm still employed by the same group company. My position has changed, but that's neither here nor there. The fact is that I've managed to kind of have continuity with my employer throughout that period. So coming home, you definitely had to look at the different options that were available. So in the UK and in the US, for that matter, they offer the retail public, investing public, different wrappers, investment solutions for you to encourage people to invest. And so in the States, you've got your Roth IRA, and in the UK, you've got your ISA, where you can take after tax income or savings that you've got, and you can put it into one of these accounts up to a certain amount per year, and then all of the income and capital gains that you enjoy in that account thereafter are tax free. Right now, we don't have anything like that in Australia. We've really just got our superannuation accounts as a means to be able to invest in a tax efficient way, which is why so many people, as you well know, use property, because you get the tax pickup there as well. Now, property brings its own kind of benefits and challenges, which is why it should always be seen as just one component of your portfolio, right? Having said that, I've no doubt that there's a lot of people in Australia who achieve 100% of their investment goals through property without investing into anything else. And, if you can make that work, then, that's great. But that wouldn't be advisable for the average person, where they may need access to money relatively quickly. Property doesn't give you that liquidity, whereas some other asset classes do. So generally, this should be seen as kind of like one part of a whole, rather than necessarily like just one component, as a single asset class portfolio.
Right. So what's your personal approach to balancing your portfolio?
Like most people, I've got my superannuation, which I was contributing to the equivalent of my superannuation in the UK, and I've been doing the same here as well. The difference with me, though, is that, like a lot of people, their investment journey is really without reference to a goal. They don't really think about it when they're young, because investing really, it's for tomorrow. You're not thinking about tomorrow, in any meaningful way. It's only when you get into your late 30s and beyond that people start thinking, okay, retirement is not too far away. I need to start considering what I'm going to do here. But even then, people perhaps maybe accelerate their superannuation contributions, and that might be it. Where things really changed for me was when I came back to Australia. I had this interesting experience where, as I told you, I kept my job, and I initially moved home and moved in with my mother-in-law and my wife and my young son. And we weren't paying rent there, and I was maintaining my income from overseas. So I had a collapse in my cost, and my income was staying the same. And I had this opportunity to do some really great things and to set myself up for life. But unfortunately, what I did is I went out, like so many people, I went to the bank and got pre-approved for a mortgage to buy my principal home. And that's what I went off and did, because, like a lot of millennials, I had to wait until relatively late until I was in a position to be able to buy my first home. That came with some new problems, which I've never dealt with before. Now you've got an enormous liability, and you've got a single income for which to service it, because not too long after we got home, my wife got pregnant. She had twins, and she was going to be leaving the workforce. And so I had this incredible change in circumstances where I had, initially we had two incomes, no costs. Now we went to one income, enormous costs. And I like this anxiety came over me, like for the first time, to that degree in a long time. And this is not a unique story. Many people will have the same story, right? Yeah,
same
guilty,
thing.
right?
Sort of, you're on two incomes. You buy a house, you have a child. Suddenly, like the cost base, instead of just flicking somebody some rent and keeping everything relatively under control, and you've got some places that you can bounce back to, or some sofas that you can sleep on if you need to, if everything goes pear shaped. Suddenly, it's like, okay, have a child, have an extra mouth to feed that I'm completely responsible for. Wife is no longer working because she's looking after baby most of the time, and so suddenly it's one income, a mortgage, all of these costs. It can feel like a real squeeze. It's unfortunate that sort of we heap all of that onto people at roughly the same time, right? A lot of people, they decide to get a mortgage, have a child, and often start their own business, all within like 2 or 3 years. And I understand exactly where that anxiety comes from.
Yeah, and I felt a lot of kinship with many people who, up until that point, I felt like it was a different tranche of people. The Dave Ramsey in the States, who you may be familiar with, he's one of the biggest property investing, influencers, in the country over there. And I could see him shaking his head in disappointment at what I did, where I had this opportunity and I sort of flubbed it by borrowing a lot of money to buy my principal home, where I could have done other things and accelerated my path to financial freedom. But I did not do that. And so what was I going to do about it, right? And so, we had a discussion previously about, a comment that Joe Rogan had made on his podcast, where he said that most men live lives of quiet desperation, and that I was in it. Now, I didn't feel it to a significant degree, but that anxiety was there, and he said that, you find yourself in this world which you put yourself in, where you just can't wait to run away from. Now, I've never wanted to run away from anything. I've got a great life, but a lot of people are just generally uncomfortable with having a large liability for which there's no asset to service it, right? Like the leverage is not the problem, right? Because if you've got an investment property, you've got an investment loan, but you also have an investment property to service the loan. So you as an individual are not standing in between unless something goes wrong, in which case it's not going to be that big of a deal. But with your principal home, you are the asset. You're the one that's having to pay off this thing. And you really want to get yourself out from under that and try to put yourself on the path to financial freedom as quickly as possible. And for me, that was when the penny really dropped. The penny really dropped for me when I was like, right, I need to kind of step back from this situation and try to build a path to financial freedom. Because what I've just done is not a path to happiness, where you're going to potentially do what a lot of people do. They're going to say, right, I've got this liability. I'm going to de-risk my life. I'm going to try to accelerate my mortgage repayments by cutting costs where possible. And that's where the source of the accelerated repayments are going to come from. And that's going to make things, it might make you feel a little bit better, but that's a long road, to try to pay off your mortgage out of income over the life of the mortgage term is really, it's not going to lead people to where they think they're going to want to get to, right?
It's a long road to pay off a mortgage if all you're doing is using whatever cash is left over at the end of the month of salary that you haven't used. It's a long, long road, and I guess that's why sort of maybe the generation of our parents, I'm sort of assuming we're approximately the same age, the generation of our parents, that's why they were so gleeful and happy, because that's what they would do. And when they get to that moment when they have paid off the mortgage, it's just like the reduction in stress that they go through at that point and how happy they all become is amazing. Doing it these days, man, it's a tough job. It's a lot more difficult, I think, these days than it used to be, because cost of living keeps on going up faster and faster and faster. So the amount that you can save, faster than what salaries do. So the amount that you can, that extra that you can chip away, it has less and less and less and less and less of an effect.
There's an additional element to that, which you're absolutely right, and that is that, and this is the age-old argument between baby boomers and millennials, right? They'll talk about the property was worth only a small amount of money by modern standards, but the cost of the money itself was very high, and that's true. But that doesn't mean these two things are equivalent in their difficulty, right? Because now the property value is high and the money is relatively cheap, and the inverse was true back then, it takes much longer to collect the deposit, and the impact of accelerated payments on your mortgage is considerably less, because most of the repayment amount now is principal, not in interest. And so if you accelerate the payment, okay, the interest might come down a bit, but the principal's not changing. Back in the old days, small changes to those repayments would make a big difference to how quickly you could get that mortgage paid off. So anyway, we don't have to kind of go down that pathway. I'm sure that there's been a lot of people on the podcast who've spoken about the gripes between the intergenerational gripes.
There is that. The big point that comes out of it, though, essentially is right now you cannot save your way to wealth. You have to invest your way to wealth. And that could be investing in property. It could be investing in something else. It could be buying a business. But there needs to be some sort of capital investment that you make into a better future. And what's interesting that's popped up just now that hasn't really popped up on any other episodes that I've seen that we've done or that I've been part of is that you can't really save your way to a paid off mortgage. It's just too hard these days. So even if you get the mortgage, saving to pay it off is hard. The smart move seems to be get the mortgage, let the equity on that property grow, use that equity to fund another property. So now you've got two properties growing, and then eventually consolidate down. And that is the way to sort of configure everything so that you end up okay. And you talked about the anxiety before, and I think where that really comes from, and this is another nice rabbit hole that we may or may not go down. Let's see how you feel after I say it. I think it comes from soft currency, from fiat currency, where we have an inflationary environment, which means you're not incentivized to save. You have to invest. And if you want to get a good return on the investment, you have to leverage up, which means every week you've still got the bills coming in. Now, as a lot of people listening to this podcast probably know, I live in Japan, which has been, for the most part, a non-inflationary environment, at least for the 30 years up until COVID hit. And in that time, people could save, and so they don't experience that same anxiety. They have anxiety for other reasons, but they don't experience that same anxiety around my salary this week and here the bills go out. It's different because most people have like 18 months worth of savings sort of thing over here. And that takes away a lot of the anxiety. In Australia, we don't have that. And so the sooner you can get to a position where you have enough equity to tide you over if there are problems, if you lose your job or if you suffer an injury or something like that, the sooner you can get to a position where the equivalent in Japan would be having 2 years worth of salary saved up. The equivalent in Australia is having a couple of investment properties that hedge against the inflation and can look after you if the bad stuff happens.
That's right. Look, there was a few different kind of lines I could have taken then, but I'll choose this one just because it's the one that I've got, some reference material for, is that those allocations. So it's interesting kind of you were saying about, that 18 months of savings, right? And everybody we should certainly have an amount of money which is very easily accessible in the case that you've got an immediate need to access that cash, because that's something that property will not provide you, right? If you need to liquidate that property quickly, you're going to be waiting a little while before you can get your hands on that cash. And so, as you mentioned at the start of the call, I'm a CFA charter holder, and within that, there is many, many different lessons about how to go about, constructing a portfolio and dealing with wealth management. And within one of those courses, it's about goals-based investing, and there's a method for which it gives you to help people to understand how to mentally account for their savings / investments, right? So to help people kind of, okay, well, I've got an amount of money and I'm doing this with it. And you can then use this framework to kind of help them to reallocate into higher or lower levels of risk based on where they're at. And so you've got 3 different risk buckets, right? You've got your personal risk bucket, you've got your market risk bucket, and your aspirational risk bucket. Now, the first one, that keeps you out of poverty, right? If you lose your job tomorrow, you've got some money sitting there that you're not going to, be behind on your rent and get booted out of your house and then, be looking for somewhere else. And, there needs to be some amount of money there for that purpose. Then you've got your market risk bucket, right? And that is about lifestyle maintenance. Most of people's money should be in the market risk bucket, right? That's where property would sit. That's where your equities, if you own it, would sit, amongst other things. And then you've got your aspirational risk bucket. And then for those people that are interested, you've got your cryptocurrency, and that's for something which is, which, for lack of a better term, your YOLO trade, right? Like it's something you have a large chance of capital losses, but there's also the chance that it could change your life, and you can, have an allocation to that bucket. There seems to be kind of a lot of people who go in either direction. They're very conservative. They want all their money in their personal risk bucket because they're not comfortable with risk. They don't like it. And this is an issue with today, not just in the investing space, but pretty much anything where there's a collection of different ideas, like, political ideology, what have you, whatever you want to believe. If you go onto the internet and search for information, you will find it, and you will then be bombarded with more information which basically says the same thing. And so you can find yourself in a bit of an echo chamber of things that you already believed, and that can be quite destructive to building financial wealth, because if you think that the world is going to end tomorrow, you're going to find a lot of videos that say just that.
That's an interesting one. The example I've used on the Dashdot Insider podcast before has been coffee. And if you look up coffee causes blindness into Google, there will be thousands of articles that talk about how coffee may cause blindness. And it'll be because there's some component of coffee in there, some molecule or something like that. And, it's been given to rats or whatever, and some of them had impaired eyesight. And, at the bottom, it'll be, may cause blindness. Now, type in coffee improves eyesight, and you'll find thousands of articles. Again, same kind of thing, right? They've found some component, some molecule, some compound within coffee, and they've given it to rats or monkeys or something, or dogs, and they found that it improved the eyesight. Somehow they measured that. And basically what it comes down to is, do you like coffee? That's the study that you're going to believe, right? The average person. And so I think you're right, and then we do have this sort of polar environment where a lot of people are in that personal risk bucket where it's like, no, I just want to be holding cash. And I'm very conservative. I don't want to invest it because that represents risk, without identifying that holding cash is actually potentially the biggest risk of all. Well, probably not the biggest risk of all, but it's a significant risk because of inflation. It's becoming worth less and less and less each year. But they're conservative. Maybe they don't understand stocks. They don't understand property. They don't understand crypto. They don't understand metals. They don't understand any other asset classes, or any asset classes at all. All they really understand is cash. And it was good enough for their parents. It's good enough for them. They've got their personal place of residence. Why would they need anything else? Whereas the smart move for them, maybe if they could just sort of get over that mental hurdle, getting into an asset and investing wisely so that they're not always just falling further and further behind. At the other end, you do definitely have the YOLO crowd who basically, everything's turning to crap. And it's sort of an excuse for hedonism. It's just an excuse to do whatever I feel like at the moment. And normally this is a behavior that you find in a much younger generation because there is always a longer time horizon and I can earn it all back. So I can go to the casino and I can blow $1,000 and I can earn that back before I need it when I retire. 60-year-old is not going to have the same approach. And so it is sort of polarized by the age or stage of life that different people are in. And so many people seem to miss out on that middle bucket.
Yeah, it's true. It should be, this is kind of where the value of financial advice comes into it, right? And so, huge amount of Australians never seek financial advice. Now, that's partially to do with a negative reputation in the industry, right? Like the Royal Commission on, banking and finance didn't paint them in a very good light. And there was definitely some wrongdoing there. But that doesn't mean the utility of financial advice is worthless. If nothing else, because a lot of people who don't want financial advice, what they would probably tell you is that there's nothing that financial advisor is going to tell them that they can't do themselves. But they don't do it. They don't do those things themselves. They often this is the value of having a plan. So, and Dashdot do that as part of their service, where you actually create the property portfolio growth strategy, right? And so you'll be buying a property at this stage, and to ultimately achieve an income of this by this time, and it keeps people on track, because without that, and this applies in life generally too, right? Like without that target, you're going to likely underinvest, because investment is fundamentally about sacrificing expenditure today so that you can have more in the future. And people, especially today with costs exploding, that's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people. They just can't afford it. But then years down the line, they regret it, right? Particularly when it comes to the property trade. Like, and I'm in this, and I grew up on the Gold Coast, right? And so I go down there, and I'm shocked at what the value of property is now. And, if I'd have just bought some property back when I lived there, doing much better than I'm doing now. Now, I started my journey late. And so I think this is a very important lesson for a lot of people, is that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. And the second best time is today. It's never too late to start your journey. It might not be the case that you'll be able to achieve the same wild, financial aspirations that you may have done if you started young, but that doesn't mean that you can't still achieve some level of wealth, which you would not have otherwise done if you didn't do it at all. So, everybody should avoid, cynicism and being despondent about, well, the point that I was just trying to make was that, if anyone is out there and they're considering starting their investment journey, and they might be trying to tell themselves that it's too late, it's never too late to start. It really isn't. You can always start small, and don't think that, even if with modest returns, the magic of compounding can make a small pot of money grow very quickly. And it's great that you don't have to do all the work yourself. That's the killer, right? Like in this day and age, to try to build a portfolio, to try to achieve, to retire privately and not have to rely on the pension, without using investing as kind of like a supplementary tool to build those capital gains. That's a lot of heavy lifting you're going to have to do. And people just generally don't have enough money left over at the end of the month to be able to come anywhere close to that,
You mentioned anxiety before, and we've talked about it a little bit. You also mentioned the portfolio growth plans that we create for people. What I found personally, and I've heard this from a number of guests, is that when you have a plan like that and you can actually see, okay, I do this, then I do this, then I do this, and then I do this. And even if it's going to take 5 years, even if it's going to take 10, the level of confidence that you have around that plan seems to be proportional to the reduction in anxiety that you feel. So what that means is, if you've got a plan that says, in 10 years you're going to have this much, this is how things are going to be. Even if it's 10 years, it could be 15. Just how much that reduces your stress, because it's suddenly like, I know where I'm going now, and I can see what's going to happen. It takes away so much of that anxiety. If it's just sort of like, I'm buying a property, then I'm saving, and I'm going to see what's going to happen, and then I'm going to try to buy another one, it still feels like you're under that yoke of like financial obligation and stress about, am I going to get there? But just taking the time, you get the plan, and then suddenly it's like, okay, this is actually all right. I can relax. I mean, you can't stop working, but you can relax. You just don't feel stressed. It's like, and I've been fortunate that I've been able to make a few smart moves, and then you can just sort of project out and you can say, okay, well, it's all sorted by this date, and that's it. The level of stress reduction cannot easily be overstated. It really does make a massive difference getting a plan, understanding how things are going to play out. Now, of course, other things could pop up, but you get a sensible plan. Anxiety is more about like, if there's some massive if there's World War III, something like that. Okay, you can't completely get rid of any anxiety around that, depending on sort of how neurotic you are and how seriously, or which conspiratorial rabbit holes you've sort of jumped down. But in a general sense, how most people are feeling living day to day, week to week, most people, I do feel, as we said before, living the lives of quiet desperation. And the plan gets you a long way away from that, a long way away from living a life of quiet desperation. Makes you feel like, yep, you've got some control here. Things are going to be all right. So I'd like to go back then to the principal place of residence that you mentioned. You got that back in 2021, and you've kind of described that as a bit of a mistake.
I wouldn't put it as a mistake. What it was I really agonized over the purchase of this property. It's located 25 kilometers from the CBD. It does not have fantastic transport links, right? But it was a beautiful piece of land, and we had built a very nice house on top of it. But, it was a house and land package. And, I was very sensitive about losing, because, this is the issue. And this is like 90% of all dollar millionaires globally have achieved that status through property investment, right? So we should start with that. And they've done this because property investing is the one area in the average person's life where they get this tremendous amount of leverage, right? Like most people, they never owned that whole, that you only contributed the deposit and then the bank provided the rest, but then you got capital gains on the full property amount. So this is where your return on invested income comes in, right? And so I was concerned about it going backwards because, just like leverage can be fantastic if it goes in your favor. If it goes slightly against you, you can lose all of your deposit. And so it was an unknown. I didn't really know what I was going to get out of this place. But little did we know is that, the market absolutely went parabolic, that year. It was really picked up in 2020, but it kept going in 2021. It fixed the land price in January. And then on top of that, all of the cost of the building materials went up. And so to reproduce the house that we built would cost considerably more than what we actually paid. And so, that combined with the fact that there seems to be a premium placed on larger block homes, because this is about 2,000 square meters, plus we've got a conservation easement out the back, which is just designated for natural landscape. That's 3 times the size of the property again. Now we can't do anything with that, but both our property and all of the neighbours have the same. So even though we're in a high density suburb, we look out onto this bushland, which is never going to be touched. So yeah, I think based on what we've seen in terms of comparable sales in the areas, we've done relatively well out of this house. And, that's definitely helped with the anxiety as well, because, when we were right there with a lot of the people where we're borrowing at what at the time seemed like the top of the market. You don't know if it's going to keep going, and it did keep going. And so that definitely helped, because now even if things do move backwards a bit, it means that, it's only eating into those capital gains we've enjoyed over the past couple of years rather than eating into the deposit, right? So yeah, I mean, and just to your point about, anxiety, I heard this a few years ago because we used to be friends with a person who was a counselor. Well, she was a psychologist in London. She's saying the best thing you can do for your mental health is multiple streams of income, you know. And well, and the funny thing there is just like, and it makes sense because so many of the issues a counselor may approach, a person may approach a counselor with, they're, dependent parents, dependent children, it's this, it's that. And so many of these issues can be resolved if you had the resources to deal with it, right? And so, to try to kind of increase your wealth, even though that in some people's minds might bring more problems, I don't personally think it does. It's actually the acquisition of these depreciating assets by, if you increase your lifestyle in line with your wealth, that's when you're going to have the anxiety stay right where it is. If anything, it might actually increase because now you've got your liabilities have increased, your expenses have increased, your assets and income have also increased, but in line, but you don't feel any better off. That's more to worry about. This is where the whole more money, more problems come in, but it's actually not more money, more problems. It's the increase, it's the golden handcuffs, right? If you want to increase your lifestyle in line with your perceived level of wealth, that's a recipe for anxiety as well. So you've got to really have discipline about trying to avoid increasing your lifestyle in line with your wealth. And there's some fantastic interviews with very wealthy people online. I think it was Floyd Mayweather. Now, this is a guy who's got hundreds of millions of dollars, right? But he's like, unless what I'm thinking about buying is less than 10% of my wealth, I will not touch it. And this is a person who could buy a lot of things, right? Yeah, buy anything. And he's got a lot of discipline because he knows how easy it is to slip into the trap of increasing your lifestyle. Like Michael Jackson did that. He was incredibly wealthy at one point, but he had all of these things in his life, and ultimately it was his financial undoing. So you don't want to put yourself in that position if you can avoid it.
Right. It's very much in line with The Millionaire Next Door, which is a great book. Talks about like what is the allocation that you need to put into investing for tomorrow, and working out how to track that so that you know that you're actually going to get there. And they worked out what the formulae need to be based on very, very high net worth individuals. And they were following much more of a Floyd Mayweather path, where it's like, okay, am I going to invest in this? Am I going to buy this? How do I keep a handle on my lifestyle so that it doesn't get out of hand? And definitely recommend that. It really changed my attitude towards investing. So that principal place of residence, you bought it. Financially, it might be considered a mistake, but it sounds like it's turned out like a happy mistake. It's turned out pretty well. I promised everyone at the top of the show that we would talk a little bit about your portfolio. Now, you bought a couple of properties here. One of them was for $429,000, and that was about 21 months ago. And the latest val has come in at 526. So a little over a year and a half ago, it's up by 22.61%, and the total growth has been 97 grand, which is pretty decent. It's pretty good. And then we've got an absolute screamer here, which you bought around about the same time. That was for 352,000, and that's now at 552,000. So that's gone up by 200 grand in about a year and a half. And the total growth, 56.82%. These are all official vals. And the return on capital invested, which I imagine for someone in your line of work is a very, very key number to have a look at, 284.09%. So you've basically tripled your money on what that initial was. Now, obviously, if you sell, there are going to be some selling costs, and so it'll come down from that. But overall, pretty awesome result. How much of that was a result of the principal place of residence, the growth that you got in that one property?
Well, I mean, the growth in that property, I mean, I haven't actually worked out what would be the return on invested income, but it's about 80% I've earned on our principal place of residence. And that was a considerably more expensive property than the other two, right? And so because of the leverage, the return on invested capital would be more magnified. So even though like our wealth has certainly increased, and Dashdot has been a considerable component to that. Those properties, the principal place of residence has been, the primary driver of that increase, right? Now,
and that's enabled you pull the equity out of that. And
I do. They were completely. We did them separately. So the principal place of residence, there's no nexus between that house and these other two. They were bought completely separately, and I did that for the reasons we discussed earlier. So the principal place of residence was acquired first, the build then commenced, and then thereafter we looked at, working with Dashdot. It wasn't a given, by the way. There's always the risk, or there's always the temptation, I should say, of taking that excess amount of money and putting it against your mortgage, right? And that's what a lot of people would do. I've borrowed this amount of money. I've contributed the deposit. This is the amount left over. What do I do with it? I can put it against my mortgage and reduce my monthly repayments, and then get back on that wheel and just try to pay the rest off out of income over the term of the loan. Or
pedal as fast as you can.
You can step into risk. You can actually increase your assets and your liabilities in your life by building your property portfolio. And then, and this will make things, let's not mistake things, this will make your life more risky in the interim period, right? You're increasing your leverage, until you've liquidated those investment properties or, paid them off, what have you. You're going to have a larger amount of assets, but you're also going to have a larger amount of equity, of liabilities. But that shouldn't concern you anywhere near as much as you would for your principal place of residence, because the asset pays for the liability, you know. And if you can find yourself in a situation where you can pay off your principal place of residence and only have investment properties, I expect that the average person would feel very differently about potentially having a much larger level of leverage. But because it's not on them personally to have to pay it off, you're okay with it, right? And somebody else who has just a simple home and no portfolio whatsoever, that person's living in, living with anxiety every day, and it is something that I feel like there's that psychological element about financial planning, which is it's a lot of people need to get past, right? And a lot of these psychological biases come from how people were raised, what's their attitude towards money with their parents. Did you grow up in a household where you weren't financially secure, right? And that often does two things to a person, right? It either sends a person sees this and say, I need to build as much insulation around myself to stop myself falling into poverty in some way. And that would be the personal risk bucket, right? They're going to put as much money into those low risk options just so that there's nothing that can happen that can boot them out of their home, right? And that could be something pretty extreme. But then you've got the people on the other side of the coin who grew up in a house when there might have been financial insecurity, and they say, now I need to be incredibly successful to build that same insulation against this situation that I'm in as a child, and then they go on to become wildly successful. This is actually a similar story to what Gordon Ramsay had. There's interviews online where he was in the school. He was at a school where the kids who needed to rely on effectively welfare to feed the students, they had their own line compared to the kids who their parents were paying for the food. And it was, terribly,
divisive.
Yeah, it's just it singles out the kids who's, they come from poorer families, and it affected him. He saw him. He was in this line. It's like, wow, I feel terrible. I need to really work hard and do something important with my life to make sure this never happens to me again or my family. And then he ended up, it's what created the drive. It created the passion to go on to do everything that he did, right?
So we sort of repeat or reject the patterns that we've lived when we're younger.
Yeah, and it's down to each individual, I personally feel, about how they really process those experiences, that trauma, really, of their youth. Do they step into risk, or do they lean away from it? And for those people that are leaning away from it, there are things that you can do to try to kind of overcome, but there does need to be some element of acknowledgement and doing things outside of your comfort zone, because without doing that, you're not going to get to the. I feel like it's a pathway to anxiety.
We keep talking about the risk factor, right? Stepping into risk and this sort of thing, and it feels like it's risky. But based on the numbers and the number of people that we've spoken to, it turns out not really to be that much of a risk if you just do like half a dozen things right. Like if you just do due diligence on the property, you don't overextend yourself, you make sure that you get the right finance package, you just do half a dozen things that are simple things, you do those right. I don't know anyone, and I've spoken to probably thousands of property investors, I don't know anyone who has ever just done some of the basic things right, got the professional advice, had someone find the property for them, so that you're leveraging expertise. Doing those things, I don't know anyone who regrets getting into property. Some people get into property and they buy the wrong one, or they do the wrong thing. It's not necessarily the smart move, and 4 years later, it's gone up by 80%. So it's in your case. So
I feel that point that you made is an important one, and that is that don't underestimate the value of advice. A great piece that I've heard in the past is some of the most expensive advice you'll be ever given in your life is advice that is free, right? You don't underestimate the value of paying a professional to help you to achieve your goals. This is not even just in the investment space. It can be in anything, right? But, if you've got people in your life and they think that they're an expert because they've had one anecdote of success and they think that they're now qualified to be able to talk to other people, be careful because it might not work out for you the same as it did for them. So yeah, that's definitely something that people should very carefully weigh up, because there is a cost to paying for advice. And to the point that I was making earlier about people's skepticism about the cost of financial advice, it is expensive. Now, there should certainly be reform to the financial advice industry to make it more accessible to people, because right now for them to pay $3,000 upfront to get a statement of advice, and that statement of advice for a lot of people who are just starting the process, it doesn't seem to be worth the money. All they're going to say is, get income insurance through your super. They're going to say you should start building a property portfolio, and maybe a novated lease for your car. Yes, some things like this. But, obviously it differs based on every individual. But, $3,000 is a lot of money. But the issue is that this is a lesson that you certainly should take away from wealth management, is that those getting things set up correctly at the beginning will pay dividends later on. Because if you are going to go on this journey of investing, to do so in a tax efficient structure is something that you need to do from the beginning. Because if you kind of do things but somewhat haphazard at the very beginning, you're an individual person, and then you find that you are successful. You do go on and you've got a bunch of properties and they're generating income, but now you've got new problems. How am I going to, what happens when I pass away? What happens when I want to hand this off to my kids? And now they've got to pay, I know that there's deferrals in Australia, but there's better ways to manage your, succession planning than just trying to do it by yourself. And if you try to seek that advice after the portfolio is in place, there's only so much that can be done for you,
100%. Some of those financial mistakes can be really, really costly. And you mentioned the cost of actually getting proper financial advice, paying $3,000. It's probably a good time for me to put in a shameless plug for Dashdot here. We don't charge for our initial consult. We just want you to have the right info so that you can make the best decisions moving forward. And I think that's probably a really good note on which we can wrap things up. Marcos, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your unique insights as somebody who manages a portfolio, has been on an interesting journey, understands how risk can play a role in working out where you're going to allocate your resources so that you can get better growth, and fantastic results that you've had. And thank you for all of the nice things that you've said about Dashdot.
No problems at all. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks very much. And to everyone listening, we hope you'll tune into the next episode. Thanks very much. Bye.